So our talk is called Sweet QuaDreams or A Nightmare Before Christmas, Dissecting an iOS O-Day. So just before we jump into it, we do want to mention we are talking about an attack that happened in 2021. However, the findings that we're talking about are recent because it took a while to piece together all of the different elements as we collaborated on this attack. We're not dropping any CVEs on stage, sorry. We are all for responsible disclosure, so we have shared all of the technical details of our findings with Apple. So a little bit about me. My name is Christine Fossaceca, and I'm a senior security researcher at Microsoft. I work on features for Security Copilot, as well as the Defender for Mobile app. And I also work for Microsoft Threat Intelligence doing iOS threat hunting. I'm also the co-host of Her Hacks podcast, a podcast by women in cybersecurity for everyone. So please check it out everywhere you get your podcasts.
Christine is also the foremost iOS guru at Microsoft. Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Marczak. I am a senior researcher at Citizen Lab, based at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs. For those of you who haven't heard of the lab, we have a number of research streams focused around internet freedom. So the one that I'm focused on mainly is what we call targeted threats. So the targeted threats research stream focuses on primarily what we call mercenary spyware companies. So companies that you're probably familiar with, like NSO Group and their Pegasus spyware, or Citrox and their Predator spyware, which caused quite a scandal in Greece and other countries in Europe, and Kangaroo, another one of these companies. But the company that we're going to talk about today is another mercenary spyware company, not one of these companies, but we will be talking about spyware and iPhone spyware. So before we jump in, before you have the capability or the capacity to run spyware on an iPhone, you need some sort of initial access to the phone, right? And typically, the way that this is done, or traditionally, is through an exploit in Safari. So the initial vector, the mechanism by which spyware gets on the phone is perhaps you convince a target to click on a dodgy link, which exploits, CVE, whatever. I don't think it's controversial to claim that pretty much 24/7, 365, there is some working Safari O-Day out there that will get you RCE within Safari. In this case, the message in question is, it's in Arabic there. It says, new secrets about torture of Emiratis in state prisons. And it was sent to an Emirati UAE human rights activist, Ahmed Mansour, back in 2016. Now, he didn't click on this link. So he looked at it and said, that's a little bit dodgy looking, like, what is this sms.webadv.co? What is this info SMS sender? So he was able to notice something amiss and forwarded it to us at Citizen Lab. And this sort of underlines one of the weaknesses of these so-called one-click attacks, right? The target can notice something and become suspicious. So this leads a number of these threat actors, these mercenary spyware companies, to look for something stealthier, a better option that can't be noticed by the victim or the target. You take them out of the loop. And that's called a zero-click attack. So for those of you who have been following the news about zero-click attacks over the years, you've probably come across several popular ones, such as this one here, which got its own XKCD comic. The attack was called Forced Entry and relied on a flaw in the way that iMessage processes image previews. So someone pushes you a message with an image. iMessage is going to throw image IO and core graphics, basically the whole stack at it, dozens of formats, and try and parse it. So Forced Entry was basically took advantage of an issue with JBig2, an obscure PDF compression format, but they were able to build essentially a virtual CPU out of the JBig2 segment commands, which was quite interesting. Google Project Zero did a great write-up. More recently, in this year, there was this quote-unquote WebP O-Day, which was actually a flaw in libwebp, which was imported into ImageIO by Apple, and some error with processing WebP images could be used, again, in iMessage preview generation to hijack control of the phone and install spyware. And of course, let's not forget Kaspersky and their very interesting Operation Triangulation report, again, an iOS zero-click attack against people at Kaspersky and potentially other people around the world, which used an issue in font parser. It was a font in a PDF in another file sent through iMessage, and it was the preview generation that kind of kicked off the initial access.
So we do want to level set for a second because we are talking about 0 days and 0 clicks, and we want to make sure that we are defining these for everybody in the audience. So a 0-day is an exploited vulnerability for which at the time of the exploit there's no patch available. So this could either be a unique vulnerability or a series of exploits chained together in a new way that hasn't been seen before. Oftentimes you'll see a CVE assigned to this as well. A 0-click is a remote vulnerability for which there's no user interaction required, so no clicking. So in this case, it would be something in a parsing mechanism that Bill mentioned rather than receiving a link that the user has to click on. And so 0-clicks are always targeting any event where the receiver device will immediately parse that information without the user even knowing. And so something that Apple saw was that iMessage was a very popular attack vector for these threat actors, and they decided to do something about it.
So what do they do? So Apple introduced Blast Door, which is a sandbox around many different elements of the iMessage processing pipeline. So what Blast Door does is it essentially tightly controls things like iMessage preview generation, and this potentially makes it much harder for threat actors to do this. Apple introduced this a couple years ago. And this sort of led to a natural bifurcation or fork in the road for these threat actors, right? So anytime that some sort of new security measure is introduced on a popular attack vector, you can either try and attack or circumvent that security measure, or you can do something different. So for threat actors like NSO Group, we saw them have pretty good success, attacking and circumventing Blast Door. But the threat actor that we're talking about today actually chose a different, somewhat novel attack surface that we'll get to later in our talk today.
So Bill and I are going to tell you a story about the things that we observed. And first, we're going to talk about how we even started working together in the first place, the discovery of the attack and our samples. We're going to talk a little bit about attribution and the static and dynamic reversing of the samples. And we're going to give you our theory of the exploit, how we think it works based on our interpretations and the testing that we did. So whenever you are doing reverse engineering or discovery on forensic analysis for iOS or mobile devices, you're going to start with logs. So you have two approaches that you can take. You can either do a top-down approach where you start with the sample itself, and you're going to use IDA or Ghidra or something like that to do static reverse engineering. And you're going to look for the forensic traces it's intending to leave behind. If you have Frida, you might end up running the sample dynamically and then looking at your device, and after detonation, seeing if there's any logs or something left behind on the device that indicates that that sample had run. Alternatively, you can start with the device itself, which would be a bottom-up approach.
Right. So in a bottom-up approach, what you're doing is you're trying to find things that look odd or look implausible, artifacts in the log suggesting something was happening that maybe shouldn't have happened. And then from there, you can understand what was going on around the same time on the phone and potentially try and attribute any malicious things that you find. So you can discover unknown types of spyware this way. So what are some examples, right, of implausible artifacts? Well, my favorite is there's this very lovely directory on your iPhone called private var db com apple xpc role account destaging, which is normally used for things like iOS updates or iOS developer tools, things like this. But it's also pretty popular for threat actors. So threat actors can drop binaries in here and run them, and there's certain nice properties that they get from that. So evidence of anything that's not related to like iOS updates or developer tools running from this directory is quite interesting, and you should check it out. Also, /tmp is another very popular directory for threat actors. Why? Well, because when you turn your iPhone off and on, the contents of TMP are wiped. So it's a nice way if temporary files need to be stored, maybe temporary binaries or dilibs need to be executed from somewhere, they might go in /tmp. So any evidence that something ran from there is going to be super interesting and should be checked out. And the third example and final example here that I'll give comes to us courtesy of Kaspersky and their Operation Triangulation report, which for those of you who haven't read it should really check it out. It's a suspected US government iPhone zero-click hacking campaign. So what Kaspersky found is they found that within the phone logs, there was evidence that a process identifying itself as backup agent had consumed mobile data on the phone. Now, backup agent is a legitimate binary on the phone whose functionality has mostly been subsumed by another process, backup agent 2. And even so, it's difficult to fathom either of these processes using mobile data because they simply manage mechanisms of USB backup and restore and ordinarily don't seem like they should really be using data. So that would be another good thing to dig into and investigate there. Now, from time to time, we at Citizen Lab look at devices belonging to members of civil society. So that's pretty much our mandate in investigating these mercenary spyware groups. We look at civil society, so journalists, activists, dissidents, lawyers, et cetera. And we sometimes do checks of phones. So we can take a look at the phone logs and see what's going on. And recently, we had found several phones with one of our implausible artifacts, so a dodgy-looking process running out of this roll account destaging directory. The process is called subrigd, which of course is a legitimate process name on the iPhone, but the legitimate process should never be run out of this directory. The other interesting thing is that our analysis was able to substantiate that the phones were negative for NSO Group's Pegasus spyware, which is like, the one everyone talks about, right? It's very widespread, dollars to donuts. If you're looking at an iPhone that's been compromised, it's probably Pegasus. So the fact that there was no evidence of Pegasus suggested that we were looking at something new.
So Microsoft Threat Intelligence is constantly tracking in the wild threats, and of course we map those threats and their behaviors to our various taxonomy elements. So as an example, a tsunami is a PSOA. And so we had found a sample mapped to a tsunami, and it actually was a hard-coded sample that contained the exact same string that Citizen Lab was seeing. So in the spirit of collaboration, we decided to get together because we were able to correlate their forensic analysis with our sample. So now we're going to talk about our taxonomy and how we did attribution. So like I said, a tsunami is a private sector offensive actor. And for people that haven't heard of that before, Microsoft considers these companies cyber mercenaries. And so they will sell access as a service. So these companies are not operating the malware on their own. They're not performing any operations, but they will sell their access as a service products to various governments for them to target their victims. So in this case, we were tracking Carmine Tsunami, which is a threat actor known as QuaDreams, and their access as a service product was called Rain.
So this was quite interesting to us at Citizen Lab because we track the mercenary spyware industry, and we actually had heard the name QuaDreams before. So QuaDreams is part of a sort of industry of companies. I've displayed some of the popular companies' logos on this slide here. So it's part of this industry of companies which sell these hacking and spyware tools. And the way that they sell these tools is they say, well, look, governments are having the problem of going dark, right? Like they want to spy on terrorists, they want to spy on criminals, but these people are using advanced signal, like end-to-end encryption, all that stuff, and we can't see what they're saying, so we need these tools. So that's basically the sales pitch, but the issue with this industry is more often than not, the customers that they go after, that ultimately buy these products, are not necessarily the sort of most scrupulous defenders of human rights, let's say. So we've documented a number of cases at Citizen Lab where the industry's tools have been misused to go after members of civil society, whether that's journalists, dissidents, activists, even opposition politicians in the case of Spain and a few other countries. So definitely, a case where the tools are, maybe might be intended for one thing, but the reality of how they're sold and used is quite different. And even in London, we had a really interesting case linked to the mercenary spyware industry. A couple of years ago, the UK High Court actually found the Emir of Dubai responsible for hacking his ex-wife and her lawyers based in London with Pegasus in the context of a child custody dispute. So not only are the abuses sort of confined to these issues of civil society and journalists and dissidents and politics and stuff like that, it can also get very personal, especially if you're having a lawsuit against someone who is a government. So QuaDream, the name QuaDream was very interesting to us, as I mentioned, when Microsoft told us that, because we had been tracking infrastructure related to QuaDream. So this is using data from sources like Shodan or Census, along with some other access that we have, looking at where these servers for the spyware are located. So we were able to identify, I don't know, like about a dozen countries or so, maybe like 10, including countries where you might not expect the governments to necessarily have the top tier level of respect for human rights that you might hope they would have. For instance, countries like Mexico, where the government's been abusing surveillance tools for years. Countries like Singapore, where there's quite ubiquitous surveillance practiced by the government, and countries like the UAE or Uzbekistan, which again have potentially problematic records of going after dissidents. So these matched up very neatly with the general locations where we were seeing this sub-bridge D indicator in forensics. So that was sort of a nice validation. And again, we're not releasing too much details about victims or victim locations due to the victims. We don't want to put anybody in danger by doing that.
So now that we've talked about where the sample came from, we're going to talk about the sample itself and some of the reverse engineering we did on that sample. But we do want to mention that iOS is one of the most difficult platforms to exploit. So when we see these exploits, it's not just a single binary. It's usually multiple payloads, multiple things working in symphony with each other to achieve code execution. And they have to bypass all of the protection mechanisms that Apple has put in. So I'm going to focus on a few, but this exploit did have bypasses for all of these mitigations. And so some of them that are Apple specific or that Apple has modified in some way are sandboxing and entitlements, which kind of go hand in hand. So you've probably heard of the sandbox, and that really just refers to containerizing execution context so that things in an execution context can't affect other areas of processing on the device. So usually third-party apps are sandboxed, so they can't affect each other, and they also can't affect other processes on the system. And Blastdoor is a sandbox. Safari Web Content Parser is its own sandbox. And that goes along with entitlements. So entitlements are specific system permissions. And so even if a binary is able to find a way to execute, certain functionality like Apple Pay or even WeatherKit actually requires its own entitlement as well. So with all the permission in the world, a binary can execute, and without the proper entitlement, still won't be able to perform some of those sensitive actions. Additionally, code signing and AMFI are a really important part of the protection process because it prevents malicious actors from making any changes to binaries on disk. So first, every binary has to be validly signed with a valid certificate, and that certificate is actually checked at runtime in AMFI. And so if a binary is attempted to be modified and written back to disk, it will likely be killed by AMFI. This is why most exploits you'll see running in memory instead. And then, of course, pointer authentication codes, which you've probably heard of. Apple introduced this in ARM64E, and they added padding to the beginning bits of pointers, and that padding is where the signature is so that every pointer is signed. This means that ROP and JOP can't happen. So those are some of the mitigations that we saw this very advanced piece of malware overcome. So when reversing the sample, we also were able to figure out what we think it was doing. And so one of the things, of course, was grabbing device information. So it was grabbing Wi-Fi information, like the SSID that the device is connected to, whether or not the device was in airplane mode. It was grabbing carrier information, so SIM data, phone number, and even iOS version information. Additionally, it was spying on the user, so we saw that it was recording audio from both the calls and the microphone. It was taking pictures, and it was tracking the user's location. Additionally, it was accessing the keychain, so it was exfiltrating and deleting some items from the keychain, and it was deleting other files on disk that we are going to talk about later because they're very important. But something else about iOS malware, and this is very, very common, there's usually no persistence mechanism, and in this malware as well, we were not able to identify a persistence mechanism. So this is largely due to Apple's mitigations. Apple has developed the secure boot chain. So if a threat actor wants to establish persistence on an iOS device, they not only need to exploit the context that they're in, such as the iOS system, but they also have to exploit all of the preceding boot levels ahead of that. So if you look at the boot chain, you start at the boot ROM, you go to the low-level bootloader, then iBoot, then the kernel. So to establish true persistence in the classic sense, an exploit would have to basically exploit down that entire boot chain, and then upon reboot, it would be able to establish persistence. That is incredibly difficult. So instead, a lot of advanced threat actors do something else, and they find creative ways to get persistence, and that's usually re-exploitation upon reboot. So ZecOps put out a blog that was a really interesting idea for establishing persistence, and so what they did was they said, we're just never going to let the phone shut down. And this was just a POC, so it was just a theory of an attack. But what they did was they developed a Debian file that hooked the reboot functionality on the device, so that when the user thought they were rebooting the device, it actually wasn't. So if you were able to get an exploit on a device and get access to it, and your device never rebooted, then they would essentially have persistence. Other malware, because maybe they wouldn't want to rely on that because, phones die, things happen, they want to make sure that they re-exploit upon reboot. So Pegasus did this. They were able to partially compromise the boot chain, so they modified a command RT-buddy, which is past the tac early boot command. And so that's the normal boot process. However, what they did was they modified the RT-buddy file, and then they created a file called tac early boot. And so instead of running the original boot up command with that flag, it ran their binary that they had modified with a file containing their exploit. So that was how they were to re-exploit upon reboot. Then 2021, the Predator malware contained an iOS shortcut automation. And so iOS shortcuts are supposed to be a feature for the user. Your phone using Siri is supposed to kind of watch what you do and assist you. So like, let's say you check your calendar every morning. It should automatically open your calendar after it establishes this behavior. So they created a custom shortcut that anytime any app was open on this device, so after reboot, the exploit would be run instead. So persistence is really a miss feature with zero-click exploits, because anytime you have persistence and you are modifying things and you're writing back to disk, that's another artifact that's going to be left for us to find. So they really don't want to have persistence on the devices because they want to make our jobs harder. Another thing that this sample did was it was able to subvert iCloud two-factor authentication codes. So a process called addID is normally responsible for generating these codes. And it's actually really hard to reverse because of the fair play DRM. So it's really treated like a black box, and if a threat actor wants to use this or another similar process, what instead they'll do is they'll use a technique called dilib injection. And this allows a threat actor to grab functions in an existing binary and overwrite them in memory with their own functionality. So this threat actor was hooking into addID and then function hooking to generate codes. So I want to explain dilib injection in a little bit of detail, and so this code is a POC on Jonathan Levin's website. And so the first step, this is if you have access, so you've bypassed all of those mechanisms that I talked about earlier, and so now you're able to execute code on the device. First, they're going to find the PID of the target process and then grab a task port, and a task port is essentially a handler to that process, so you can modify memory and do things to the process that you want. Then you're going to allocate memory in the process because you are about to write shell code into that process memory. And so then when you write shell code into that process, you can't write and execute memory at the same time, so of course you have to change that memory that you've just written to executable. So the next thing that you want to do is you want to spin off a thread so that your shellcode executes. And so the shellcode itself is going to contain a pointer to DLOpen that will be populated when the shellcode is run. And then DLOpen will DLOpen your dilib. And so your dilib is how you perform the function hooking, because the function hooking is, the dilib is going to contain the overwritten function hook. So instead of hooking the actual function, when the function runs in add ID, it will run your code instead because you've just opened your dilib with DLOpen. And so this is how they were able to subvert iCloud two-factor authentication, because it was add ID generates TOTP or time-based one-time passcodes, and it was leveraging this functionality inside of add ID. So get time of day normally grabs the current time of day to generate a TOTP code, and instead what they were doing was they were modifying and they overwrote get time of day so that they could generate arbitrary future codes. So we thought this is very interesting, because why would you want to be generating these future codes likely for access later on?
Right. So one of the other interesting features that we were able to identify, which is like a little bit different than your typical mobile spyware, is the sample had this really complex predicate language which the spyware's operator could use to configure conditions under which certain actions of the spyware could be run. So what did this allow them to do? Well, the conditions that could be used or conditioned on were things like, is there a VPN connection active on the phone? Is the phone connected to a proxy server? Is there a third-party jailbreak? What's the battery status? Is it charging? Is there a device plugged in? What's the battery percentage? What's the battery temperature? Which was kind of interesting. What's the CPU utilization? Is it located in a certain country? Is the traffic flowing over mobile data or Wi-Fi? Has there been an upload by the spyware that has exceeded a certain threshold within a certain limited duration? Has the user of the phone traveled to a new country? Are they within certain radius of certain coordinates? Is there a threatening process detected on the phone, like maybe a security tool? And then they can chain these together using and, or, not, or pipe. So they could theoretically come up with like a really complex condition saying, well, only exfiltrate data if there's no VPN or proxy connected, the device hasn't been jailbroken, it's not plugged in via USB, the CPU utilization is low, the battery temperature is fine, so we're not, stressing the user's phone, et cetera, et cetera. So pretty complicated. We don't normally see this in your sort of average mobile spyware sample. Another interesting thing, and this gets us to the exploit, the initial access vector that was being used, was we identified a peculiar cleanup command that could be received by the spyware from the command and control server. And this cleanup command contained a single parameter, which would be an email address. And what would happen upon receipt of this email address? Well, the first thing the spyware would do when it received this cleanup command with the email is it would open calendar.sqlite.db. So what is this file? Well, this is a file on every iPhone that essentially controls what is displayed in the iOS built-in calendar app, which, I don't know, I guess some people use it. I'm not a big iOS calendar fan. Anyway, so the second step is it received this email address and then ran a bunch of SQL queries. And don't waste your time trying to parse these queries necessarily, but basically I'll tell you what they do. So it's basically looking for any event or activity involving this email address and then deleting it and then vacuuming the database. It's a little bit odd, right? Like, why are you deleting a calendar? This is not something you'd normally find in spyware. So we thought, maybe the initial access vector involves the calendar. Let's check people's calendars, where we found these forensic traces of the subbridged process from the roller canopy staging directory. So there's two ways you can check someone's calendar, at least, on their iPhone. You can check it on the phone directly in that calendar SQLite-DB file, or you can connect using their account to the CalDAV server, which is run by iCloud on iCloud.com or whatever, and download the iCalendar files directly from there. Now, CalDAV, iCalendar, blah, 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 it's a really complex legacy calendar protocol. It's very, very Byzantine, but basically iCalendar is sort of a plain text format. You can see a redacted version of an interesting event that we found around one of the times of compromise on one of the devices. So you can see, begin vCalendar, there's a key, which is begin, separated from a value with a colon. So it's sort of key value pairs, right? Plain text, nothing super interesting. But a few things stood out to us about this event. So this event that we identified was in fact added to the user's calendar about 6 months after it ended. Well, that's odd, right? Like, who invites someone to an event in the past? Like, that doesn't make sense for like a real benign event or invitation. But what we were able to identify is that if you backdate events, if you send a calendar invitation with an event start time in the past and end time in the past, then the user never receives a notification about this invitation. So there's no like friendly pop-up saying, someone has invited you to an event 6 months ago. Like that, it just doesn't get generated if the event is in the past. Yeah, interesting. We also were able to identify some weird characters in these description and attendee, the key portion, not the value portion, right? So you see these like, square bracket, angle bracket, and C data. So C data is in fact nothing related to iCalendar, but it's a tag in XML, which says the stuff within the C data tag, treat that like plain text. Even if there's XML tags in there, don't process them as XML tags. So wait a minute, where's XML coming from, right? Well, it turns out that this plain text calendar blob is transmitted from the CalDAV server to the client inside an XML document, because I guess CalDAV is an XML-based protocol based on WebDAV. It's all very complicated and lots of legacy stuff here. Anyway, so what we were able to identify is that if the attacker is closing out the CData tag, they can insert XML, which in fact will be processed by the phone's XML parser. Really? Does this work? Yeah, so we tried it, and you can try it at home too. Basically, the process by which these events or the XML documents get processed is through NSXML parser, which is some Apple stuff that like basically wraps libxml2 in SAX mode. And you can actually hook this CalDAV function that is essentially the element callback for SAX for the XML parser, which is QuaDreams XML element generator, really long name, blah, blah, blah. So you can hook it with Frida and verify that this XML actually does reach the phone's XML parser. Meanwhile, you can also verify that the iCalendar parser only sees the stuff in CData tags. So as soon as there's a closed CData tag, the iCalendar parser closes its eyes, not looking, and then when the CData is reopened, then it starts looking. So this essentially parses to a legitimate iCalendar event with a description of notes. And we found a couple cases where, in fact, I guess for whatever reason, it wasn't deleted from the calendar SQLite DB, and the description field that was parsed out was notes. Okay, this is interesting, but is there any way to test sort of like the server component here, right? Like we don't really want to be sending CData escapes through Apple's calendar server that's in production, right? That seems like a potential CFAA issue in the United States at least. So how do we do this? Well, it turns out that Apple has an old open source CalDAV server, which I guess maybe they used to use in production. They don't use this anymore. It's like an archived GitHub project, but you can check it out and build it. And we were able to verify that if an attacker wants to send these CData characters, the server will in fact reject it if they're in the value portion of the key value pair, but will accept it if they're in the key portion. So that's cool. So that sort of mirrors what we saw in the calendar events that we identified on the server. Additionally, you might be thinking, okay, well, wait a minute. You're talking about a CData escape to execute XML. I didn't see any XML in that calendar invitation. What's going on? Well, I'm glad you asked. So it turns out that the attacker, if they include XML code initially, can then send an update to the server to remove any XML code. And the way this works is the CalDAV server interprets description, close bracket, close angle bracket, as a sort of undefined or user-defined key. And you can update it by just giving that key a new value. So in this case, we think the attackers might have included some XML initially, then updated it to include the character X instead of the actual XML code. Is there any evidence for this? Well, sort of. We can see that in the malicious or suspected malicious calendar events, they were updated once. That sequence number, as in many things in computer science, we like to start from zero, start counting from zero. So yes, this event was in fact updated once, presumably by the attacker to remove the XML code. So again, we are sort of following the logic here. We didn't actually capture any malicious XML code here, but we think this is presumably the way or the mechanism by which the attacker got initial access. In other words, QuaDreams apparently, eschewed the popular, like iMessage, attachment processing, zero-click vector, and found some sort of notification-free, zero-click way to reach the XML parser on the phone, and then did, potentially naughty stuff with that. So I will pass it back over to Christine for a few concluding thoughts.
So the first thing that we want to say is collaboration and information sharing is very important, and we really wouldn't have been able to do this without the information that we've gotten from each other. It's also important that civil society works with groups like Citizen Lab because that's how they're able to even know that they were being targeted in the first place. Also, whenever a software developer is introducing a new convenience feature, it's important that they're looking at it from a security perspective. So cloud services are like this new vector that's being added because of all of the things that are being added as a convenience or like really cool feature. So as an example, previously people were able to be attacked, whether you knew their phone number or their iMessage email address. Solely with that information, they were able to be targeted. Now with this iCloud vector, that is a whole new vector, and again, all they need is their iCloud email address, and that's because the convenient feature of me being able to send you an invite, maybe me not even knowing you, but your phone automatically parsing that invite and adding it to your calendar for your convenience is actually a huge attack vector. So bear that in mind when developing new features.
Yeah, it's also important to consider when you're building defenses to build defenses that are broader rather than necessarily just taller in one area. So Blastdoor was great. You know, it was a response to the popularity of iMessage attachment processing zero clicks as a thing. But if you just do Blastdoor and you're not focusing on the whole holistic attack surface, then you might miss things, which are opportunities for attackers. So it's good to sort of think about all the possible ways that a phone can be reached holistically as one attack surface. And features like lockdown mode have started to move in this direction. So lockdown mode, introduced by Apple in iOS 16, one of the main things it does is it blocks the phone from processing invitations or things that are sent by people not in your address book across a whole range of Apple services. So this is great. But at the moment, it's an optional feature, and we hope that going forward, developers will think more about how to make this less optional and roll it out on a wider scale, sort of like the way two-factor authentication started optional and is now becoming a little bit more prevalent.
All right, thank you all for listening to our talk, and I think we do have some time for questions, so if you would like to ask questions, make your way to the podium.
Thanks so much. Really interesting, very informative. Now, I was just wondering how you reached to the point that you started looking at the calendar, because when we are doing iOS forensics, there are so many things, there are so many files that you have access to and not have access to. For example, if the iOS is not jailbroken, you don't see so many files, and then even the files you see, difficult to read, binaries and all. So let's say if you're doing an analysis, what were the steps that you followed or you usually follow to reach that point where you identified something like this?
Do you want to take it or should I take it?
Well, I was going to say, I feel like it's really that collaboration and that top-down and bottom-up approach in tandem, because there's certain artifacts that you probably wouldn't be aware of or even think to look for if you're not looking at the sample. So the fact that we had the sample, I think, was very helpful because we saw weird things in the sample and we thought this type of activity may produce an artifact.
Yeah, we never would have thought to look at the calendar as a vector without the sort of cue from the sample.
Yeah, great question.
All right.
All right.
Well, feel free if you have any additional questions, shoot us an email, come see us in the hallway track. We'd love to chat a little bit more. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the talk. Thank you.